Senators, thank you for joining me today. Can you walk me through a little bit of what you expected coming in on Monday to this not special session, but extraordinarily long session? What did you expect coming into it?
Well, I'll be happy to start. From the Republican side, the majority side, first of all, we expected not to be here. So when we left the session last spring with a motion to sine die, we anticipated we would not be coming back to Boise, and that was really the plan. What changed that primarily for the Republicans in the Idaho Senate were the orders of the Biden administration. And so those mandates that required private businesses to do vaccinations and the other mandates on federal workers and such really changed a lot of the thinking of some of our members. And so they anticipated that we come back and we address that primarily. We did issue a press release that said as much. We really didn't anticipate doing a lot of other work than addressing the concerns that Idahoans have about vaccine mandates.
We came back, we similarly didn't think that we needed to come back, that we had adjourned sine die, and when it became evident that we would, it was a matter of questioning, and we had, like the majority party, we got in front of the press and said, is this constitutionality? There's still ambiguity. So whatever we do might end up being null and void anyway. There's just not that security. So is it proper to come back, or should we, in a very short period of time, come back in January and address it then? And then we know that we're not going to have to do something redundantly if something is passed, that we're meeting the thresholds of what we know is proper. And so there was that question of, and why we made the motions we did on the floor, about whether it was proper, because there were competing court decisions on that. That said, we also were concerned that there's the perception that we're a full-time legislature. When you look at one body only having recessed and the other one adjourning, technically we are in the longest session ever at 311 days. And so to the public, they're very concerned that if we're meeting, we're almost a full year, is this something that we're going to be doing habitually? And so there's the question of the constitutional amendment that is coming before the voters next year about whether it would be wise for us to have the autonomy to call ourselves back into special session for things, because we would argue we probably shouldn't have been here. We could have waited to a session. We're already into our 311th day. Is that the face of what we want to have the legislature look like going forward? And so we spend a lot of money when we're here during session. It's $35,000 to convene. And I would argue that if we passed a joint resolution, which is the letter to Congress about their overreach, which is the one thing that we got accomplished, we spent $100,000 to say that. Is that appropriate? Is that good use of money? It is something we could have said without coming in a different fashion. So these are valid questions that we had and the public has that we need to address.
And just my 2 cents, I agree. I think they're very important questions. I think that all of us as Idahoans need to remember that the Idaho legislature is meant to be a part-time citizen legislature. If we stray from that, I think we're making a huge mistake for Idaho. That is one of the reasons why the Senate decided to go home after a very, very long session last winter. I do also agree that we have to be mindful of what's going on for our taxpayers. It goes to the same argument, which is if we can accomplish that in a short period of time in the winter, we need to do that. And every session you have, there are members who go home and say, I didn't accomplish all that I wanted to accomplish. That's normal. And so we need to accept that is the process. That having been said, the minority leader and I have just spoken about this, but there was value in this short 3 days that we were in Boise. And what that value was for me is it demonstrated how important the process is for Idahoans. It's so important that they be given an opportunity to know what we're doing, to weigh in on that, and to be a part of that process before we make decisions that are life-altering or that alter how business is done in Idaho. So it's hard to put a price on any piece of legislation, but that whole process, I think, really showed how important it is that we do that for Idahoans.
So we ended up having the opportunity, since we were here, to be able to have very robust discussions and mostly in our committee, the Senate State Affairs, to allow the public to have the opportunity to weigh in on their worries, their concerns, the immediacy of the constraints that are against them. Good things that I think we learned from both sides. One of the things that came away for me was the lack of information about what's already in statute, what's already there that people can go to. We already have religious freedom statutes. We already have health freedom statutes. We do need to make sure they understand that there is a path forward, that we have good policy out there they may not have known about. But for some, it wasn't working for them. So it's a matter of enforcement. Can we do something then to help make sure that what we have there is adhered to, is enforced, that it is serving the people that it was intended to serve. And so those are the things that will come back in January to be able to use. It was extraordinarily important to do that. That said, much of what came to us was already being debated in federal court. And as was noted today while we were debating all this, there was a suspension of the administration's policies and a stay before that. And so even though people may not think that that is important, it was in our favor if the states believed that that was the course that they wanted to take. The courts so far have already made that determination. So do we come back and unnecessarily, because in the end, if we fight it, we're spending taxpayer money on something that's probably not winnable, and we begin using taxpayer money to do something more, better for education or healthcare or infrastructure or whatever that is. And so wise use of resources, wise use of time, but in the end also, if we were going to be here, we need to educate both ways about what we do is impacting and how we can solve problems.
Senator, you mentioned the process. This morning in State Affairs, we heard testimony for more than 3 hours regarding several bills that were addressing COVID vaccinations in one way or another. Did you learn anything from the testimony that we heard, and anything that maybe you hope to address in January, even though you couldn't address it before today?
Well, I absolutely learned new things, and something I did not learn new is that politics and policymaking create strange bedfellows. So as you listen to the testimony in Senate State Affairs today, what you realized was that the predictability sometimes that we assign left-leaning groups or right-leaning groups as to what positions they'll take on policy was not there. There was, in many instances, universal across the political spectrum rejection of some of the legislation that had been advanced to the Senate for us to consider. And that was a bit of a surprise to me. So I think that the answer to your second part of your question is we still have a lot of these policy questions to tackle going forward. This was certainly not a resolution or an end to a lot of the concerns that Idahoans have about mandates, potentially losing their jobs because the Biden administration has advanced these mandates, and the related issues that go along with that. So you will see those issues come back in the next session.
So policy is hard to explain. You can get pretty wonky with it. But it's important for people to know, and this dialogue came up in our State Affairs Committee meeting today and yesterday, is we have to look at it from a 30,000-foot level. We have to understand that whatever we pass can't be for a small faction of people. It has to, nobody's rights are any more important than another person's rights. And that's very hard to legislate or create policy for. But we have to look at it that you and I may disagree about what this policy should do for me, but they're valid, equally valid. And so when we go forward, we hear you, but you can't move forward saying, but my right is so important, why don't you hear me? And understand that then you take it away from somebody else. And there's no perfect solution, but if we're trying to do policy that will improve and be useful to at least the greater whole, it can't be just a small marginalized group, it has to be the greater whole. And, but everybody deserves to be heard, and everybody deserves to be represented. So it is this blend of lines in order to do policy that isn't trying to, we win or you lose, or it's us or it's them, which politics always wants to push towards. It's a much more collaborative, concessionary type of process where we're going to agree on pieces and we're going to disagree on pieces. And we'll agree whether that is useful or that's not useful. And you heard that when if you listen to testimony and our comments to it, trying to make them understand that we are not here to hurt you. We're here to do something that's useful to you. And so I think people don't realize, I like to tell the majority leader that people don't realize about 80% of what we do in the legislative sessions, we do very well together. We do it across party lines, we do it across houses. But about 20% is what you hear all the time because it's where we differ. And that's always going to be happening in good democratic process because we don't come from the same demographics, we don't have the same religions, we don't have the same issues that we care passionately about. And so we're always going to be at odds to a certain degree, to a certain percent. But give us some credit for all the good work that we really are trying to do well together for the betterment of our constituents.
Well, and the process that entails and encompasses civil disagreement is a process that produces good policy. I mean, some of the worst laws I've ever seen, ordinances, policies that have ever been written, have been written to these narrow set of facts that then once you get down the road, you realize, golly, we didn't think of that. And so, again, back to the process that you asked about, what's so great about it is not only do your legislators get to hear about concerns people have about particular language, but those who are advocating a certain position get to hear their opponents argue those positions that are contrary. And if you really want good law, good policy, and a good way forward for the Idaho people, that's what you do. And to be honest with you, that's one of the concerns about the mandates, because there is a feeling that they're unilateral executive orders without that process. And so I think that's why it was so important for Idaho's Senate to get together for these last 3 days.
But we also have to remember that much of what we were talking about was already not a mandate. Some of those pieces were, you're misinformed, or we need to let you know that this piece of it isn't mandated. Those are choices. But what I was very pleased to see, because it's a very passionate, people were very passionate about what was happening to them, and should be, that it was so civil and respectful. So grateful to see that people could have really, really passionate, good dialogue and still understand that we're all trying to do our best work while we're sitting in the room.
I was going to ask you about that. Senator Lodge made note that she was grateful for how civil folks were. She noted, Senator Lodge, of course, has served several terms, and she noted that it has become more divisive. And you tell me, your elected officials, how has that affected your job in recent years, or perhaps in the pandemic? I think there is a certain level of fear, there is a division. How has that affected your jobs in recent years and affected your ability to craft good policy?
I feel I've kind of got thicker skin maybe sometimes. I was a litigator for many, many years. And when you litigate cases in the court system, you realize a couple of things if you're a really good professional. And that is that the opposing attorney is not your enemy. They're just representing a position for somebody else. And you're able to argue effectively and take criticisms, hopefully effectively, without taking it personally. Understanding that for many people who are engaging in the Capitol, as the minority leader said, I mean, they are very emotionally invested. And I think that if you understand that and you treat them with respect, I think you get respect back. And you see a lot of that in the Idaho Senate. You see that in Senator Lodge, who even today, she and I didn't agree on policy. But the fact of the matter is, I respect her very much in the way that she handles her position and the way she treats other people. So I think that if we can continue to emphasize that kind of behavior in the state of Idaho, it's going to serve our people for a long time to come.
I think when people are pushed to fear and anger, it makes it's hard to have clear thinking, and understandably, because it comes from such an emotional, fear-based background, and it's really hard to think clearly. And so I think what's been really hard for us, is, at least for speaking for myself as a legislator, is to keep coming back at it with empathy and kindness, and to keep coming back and setting the example that I validate you and you don't need to be afraid. And yes, you might be angry and it may not be what it is that you would hope for, but we need to come at this with a lot of heart. Sometimes you just don't see a lot of that in politics, and we need more and more of that, because if we're really coming from policy from that perspective, we're going to have better laws that we navigate from. So what I'm pleased to see, at least in the Senate, I'm grateful to be in the Senate, because we really do like each other. We work well together. We may not vote the same. We disagree. But that does not demean the quality of the human standing next to me. And that's the example that we should set, and that's what we do set. and lead by example. And so that's where I think that we just need to keep remembering that we're just people trying to do our best work, and they all have really kind hearts, and we try to understand all the diversity that comes to us, everything that comes to us in policy, which impacts everything everybody does on a daily basis. And we have to set the example.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the
It's my
opportunity.
pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.